right, it's 6 o'clock, and tonight we're going to go ahead and start our Bible study, our 5-week Bible study called Angels and Demons. We're talking about what the Bible really says about this subject. And, as I was thinking about this subject, specifically thinking about angels, I can't think of a time in my life when I didn't have some idea about angels or some kind of maybe even little anxiety about demons. I think what I do in my mind is I put demons sort of under a rock or in a box somewhere, and I just try not to think about them. But I can remember as a kid sitting there, and this will date me a little bit, but watching a television show with my mom about an angel. It was called Highway to Heaven. Maybe some of you remember that show, and Michael Landon was able to do all these amazing things, and I didn't know what angels were. Those of you who know me know I didn't grow up going to church, or we certainly read the Bible and things like that, but I had views on these subjects like a lot of people do. They just came from television or came from popular culture or came from just what people think or thought, and there wasn't a lot of clarity about the subject. So what I want us to do is ask the question, what does the Bible say about these things, angels and demons? And I've said, and you can see it in our promotion, that this really is among the most popular subjects in religion, the whole question about angels and demons. And, one way to think about this, Michael Heiser has written a lot of books on this subject. One of them is a best-selling book a few years ago. He's an Old Testament scholar with a best-selling book called The Unseen Realm. And that's what Heiser calls this whole subject. And he says that when we're talking about angels, we're using a vocational title for all of these things in this unseen realm, and that angel is really just a job description for what they do. But as Christians, we're interested in this subject not just to satisfy our curiosity, but to learn how to engage in a conversation around what the Bible sometimes calls spiritual warfare, the book of Ephesians. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in the heavenly realms. To live a life of purpose in a world where we realize that there are unseen forces at work to work against us. And to understand our role in God's big plan for his whole world, his whole universe, both what is seen and what is unseen. And this is our battle plan over the next 5 weeks. We're going to spend 2 weeks starting tonight talking about what are angels, and then we're going to turn our attention directly to the devil. Who is the devil, depending on how you want to describe that. And then we're going to talk about demons, and then I just kind of left myself a buffer at the end because I feel like maybe we're going to need to come back to something and be able to wrap a lot of pieces together and then be able to give you opportunity to ask and answer questions. And so you can save those along the way. Each time we're going to spend about 25 to 30 minutes, and so and on each one of these topics. Tonight, our lesson 1 is on that question of what are angels? And there's some questions I'd like for us to think about when we think about this question. So these are some guiding questions for me tonight to think about. One is, what do angels do? That's a fairly good question. What are angels? That's kind of the big topic anyway. How do angels compare with people or God? And how can angels help us? Or what do they have to do with our world, our lives? So those are some questions I think that are worth asking. It's interesting if you were to stop and think about it, the whole Bible has something to say about this subject. Starting from Genesis chapter 1, from the moment of the story of Eden, right on through, we have stories about these sort of unseen celestial figures. We see angels all through the stories of Abraham. We have it all through the Old Testament with great figures like Elijah, Moses at the burning bush. And then you think about the life of Jesus. Before he was born, who said he was going to get born? An angel. When he was born in Bethlehem, who announced his birth? Angels. And then you could just walk through his whole life. When he started his ministry and he went into the wilderness, he was comforted by angels. And then at his death in the tomb, when they came there, who told the disciples that he was alive? It was angels. And when he ascended into heaven, who was standing there saying, this is where he went, and this is what's going to happen? It's angels. And it's no accident the book of Revelation is the book with maybe more angels than any other book. So the Bible has a lot to say about this subject, but I want us to start tonight by looking at what the book of Hebrews says. It's the only book in the Bible that is only about the subject of coffee. As you know, Hebrews. That's a free joke for you tonight. The book of Hebrews is powerful and brilliant. Some think it was a sermon maybe by Luke or Apollos, and it was transformed into this beautiful literary piece. The opening chapter is filled with fancy Greek language, rhetorical questions. It's all about Jesus versus the angels. That's the way the book starts. And it starts talking about how powerful and amazing and wonderful Jesus is, and then it immediately compares him to angels. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 4 and 5 says, so he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. For which of the angels did God ever say, you're my son, today I have become your father? Or again, and he's quoting the Old Testament here, I will be his father, he will be my son. And again, this is Hebrews 1:6, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. And speaking of angels, he says, he makes his angels spirits. That's interesting. And his servants flames of fire. One of the descriptions of angels in the Bible is like a fiery cherubim or seraphim in the book of Isaiah, for example. Hebrews then finishes by saying, to which of the angels did God ever say, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool of your feet, for your feet? Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? So he's asking that question rhetorically, but the answer is yes, that's what they are. And this is a glimpse into what they are. So tonight, if you've got an outline, if you didn't get one, look around. Does anybody have an extra one? Anybody need one? There's a few laying around. If you keep your hand up, I'm sure somebody will give you one. But I want to talk to you real quickly about 5 characteristics of angels. Number 1, angels are created. Now, that's kind of interesting because we might have not have thought that. We might have thought, well, maybe angels have always been around. Maybe they're just like eternal beings. But that's not what the Bible says. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 16, Paul says, for by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth. By the way, where would you find something like that in the Bible to describe? Genesis 1:1 says that, right? For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, the seen and the unseen realm. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and created for him. But the question is, well, when were these angels created? Because I read through Genesis 1 time or 2 times or 100 times, and I don't remember ever reading anything about that. Well, the text doesn't technically say, does it? But there may be a clue in the first verse of the Bible. Bereshit bara Elohim hashamayim va'haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then he doesn't talk anymore about the heavens. He just talks about the earth as if on day 1, it was all done. Maybe he created angels on the first day, maybe before breakfast. I don't know. He's that kind of God, right? But the point that we're making here is that angels are created. They are not an eternal being. They are a created being, just like you and me. Secondly, angels are powerful. We don't see that sometimes. We'll get the cards. You send somebody a card, and they'll have like this little cherub, it's called. There's no such thing like that in the Bible, right? That's a kind of a made-up kind of a thing. There's no little baby angel kind of a thing. Angels in the Bible are powerful. In fact, they're so powerful, listen to the way it's described in 2 Peter 2:11. Yet even angels, although they are stronger and more powerful, do not bring slanderous accusations against such beings in the presence of the Lord. So this is the supreme, most powerful thing that God had created. But one thing that's true of them, although they are created, unlike you and me, who are going to die, we are mortal. Angels are immortal. That means angels do not die. They had an origin, but they will continue in existence for all of time. You say, how could I possibly know that? Where in the Bible would it even suggest something like that? Well, Jesus said it. In Luke chapter 20, this parallel passage in Mark and Matthew, when he's in the temple courts and the religious leaders, particularly the Sadducees who don't believe in the resurrection, they're Sadducee, you'll remember that. They say to Jesus, how can this resurrection be? And they describe this scenario that doesn't seem to make any sense. And then Jesus responds. And his response has left us with more questions than it has ever left us with answers. But it does provide an insight into angels. In Luke 20, verse 35 and 36, it says, "But to those who are considered worthy of taking part in that age." Now, you got to explain something to you if you don't understand this. Jews in Judaism believed that we were living in a present age and that at some time in the future, the new age would dawn. Called it the new age. There's a current age and then there's the new age. The present age, the future age. The current age is temporary. It's going to run out. But the new age that will break into the world will last for all time and all eternity. So Jesus is talking about that. But those who are considered worthy of taking part in that age to come, and in the resurrection from the dead, will neither marry nor be given in marriage, and they can no longer die. And then he says this, for they are like the angels. So he makes the direct connection here between what we will be like when we are resurrected. We will have bodies that will live forever. We will live forever. We will never die. We will be immortal. We will be like the angels in the way that they have immortality. So that's one of the insights that he provides about angels. Here's a fourth thing about angels. And all through this, I may need to slow down sometimes and just kind of unpack words and things like that. But one way to think about this about angels is that they are not omniscient. The word omni is Latin for all, and then the rest of that word scientia is Latin for knowledge. They do not have all knowledge. Sometimes we talk about God and we say God is omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscient. He has the omnis. He's got them all. He knows everything. He can do everything. He has all power. Well, when we're talking about angels, we're talking about those who do not have those characteristics. They do not have all knowledge. They don't have access to all knowledge. Maybe a better way to even describe God's characteristic, by the way, rather than saying he has all knowledge, is that he knows everything that can be known. That's probably a better way theologically to talk about God than just saying, well, God knows everything. Well, what if he doesn't know something can't be known? People get into that. He knows everything that can be known. Everything that is possibly knowable. There is no human that's going to invent a computer that is going to outperform God. There is no information that can be known that God does not know and has always known. That's interesting. He's not having to learn a whole bunch of new stuff in order to figure that out. Angels are not like that. You say, all right, show me that in the Bible, okay? This is Jesus on the Mount of Olives. You got the Jerusalem behind you, the temple. It's big and beautiful and built and still being built and will continue to be being built for 30 more years. And Jesus says it's going to be destroyed. And he starts talking about all these things are going to happen. And then the disciples say, when will it happen? What will be the sign of these things that are going to happen? And then Jesus talks, of course, about his second coming. The Son of Man will come again. And then he says this in Mark 13:32. No one knows about that day or hour. No one knows. Not even the angels in heaven. Which is also, by the way, interesting because it places angels in the normal habitat as being in the presence of God. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Now, you may have read this and kind of scratched your head and said to yourself, okay, that's helpful to know about angels, but now I got a new question. How is it possible that Jesus didn't know something? You know, I mean, I thought he was God. I mean, seems like I learned that in Sunday school. How is it that Jesus couldn't have known something? Well, we call this, and it's just an easy way to remember this, I'm just going to tell you, we call this a kenotic incarnational Christology. So I figured that'd be an easy way for you to kind of hold on to that. Just kenotic incarnational Christology. So what that means is, and this comes from Philippians 2, and where it says, and he emptied himself. He was, although he had equality with God, though he had the same substance as the Father, he emptied himself. Greek, kenosis. You can almost hear him going, he's divesting himself of his divine attributes willingly. He doesn't stop being God. He just says, I choose not to have access to that in the incarnation. In the process of becoming a human being born in Bethlehem's manger, Jesus chose to give up all the omnis, the all-knowing, all-power, and all-presence. And if you think about it, it's true, isn't it? Because he was only in one place during his ministry with his disciples. In the gospel even says in Luke chapter 2 that Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man, Luke 2:52. So if he's learning, then this is not the omnis, right? So what happens is something profound is happening when Jesus becomes, but I'm saying this to you because there's a distinguishing characteristic here in this passage in which the angels in heaven do not know. They may know a lot, they may see a lot, but there are things they do not know. They do not have omniscience. Now, Jesus has ascended, so he's got it back, and you don't have to worry about that. All right, number 5. This is our last one we're going to cover tonight. Angels are not to be worshipped. Angels are not to be worshipped. You know, all through the Bible, when we think about the angelic encounters, I just encourage you just in your mind to think through all these different scenes. You know, whether it's Moses at the burning bush, whether it's, the donkey and Balaam, remember that story? And whether it's Gideon and the angel of the Lord. And all through the Bible, there's stories, all kinds of angel stories. I mean, they're everywhere. Every time someone has an angel encounter, they almost always have the same experience. The Bible will say, and they fell to their feet, and they were afraid. And the angel will say, do not be afraid. That's what happens at the empty tomb, isn't it? Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. When the angels stand there with the disciples after the ascension of Jesus, do not be afraid. There is a moment in the Bible, though, where a person worships an angel, or at least falls before an angel, and they get severely corrected for it. The place is in the last chapter of the Bible. It's in the final scene of the whole Bible. It's in the book of Revelation in the 22nd chapter. And John is just telling on himself. And he says, I, John, remember John on the island of Patmos, imprisoned there for being a leader in the church in Ephesus, where Christians were being persecuted. I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. And when I had heard and seen them, and that's everything we read about in the book of Revelation, chapter 1 to 22 now. He said, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who had been showing them to me. But he said to me, do not do it. I am a fellow servant with you and with your brothers, the prophets of all who keep the words of this book. And I love this little sentence. Worship God. And so tonight, as we embark on our study of angels and demons, as we satisfy both our curiosity in the subject and also try to learn and be encouraged and be edified in what the Bible has to say about this subject, keep in mind as we walk through this journey together over the next several weeks that the whole real purpose of this study is to redirect our attention at the Creator God and to say, with the angel of the book of Revelation, let's worship Him. Let's worship Him. All right, I'm going to stop there and let them do that. And I got 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes. If you have a question, go ahead and ask it and see if I can answer it. Because Toby, I may be able to answer it next week. But
are angels still being created?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think the answer to the question has to do with whether or not creation is a finished product. So this is a theological question. Was creation complete in the story of Genesis when God rested? Has He ceased from creation, or does He still create? And I think it's a fascinating question. And it's interesting, the Bible doesn't actually tell us the answer to that question. I find that very interesting. And and if you guys go and you find something that says they do, I want to see it, but it's not there. So I'm just going to tell you that. So this is a fantastic question. We're going to talk about it next time a little bit, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about some angels. But there are various reasons for this, right? One of the reasons has to do with the normal portrayal of angels is they are typically some kind of military kind of figure, right? And so in the ancient world, for the most part, that's going to be the figure that you're going to see. The other possibility to try to get at this, and I just skipped it tonight on purpose just because I didn't want to get muddled in it, but in Mark, when Jesus gives the answer to the question about resurrection, he actually gets into it a little bit more about whether or not, and it raises this question as to whether or not when we're angels, are we going to have gender or not? Is there even gender involved in that? Because he makes the statement about being married and so on. But this always opens up Pandora's box, right? And so did Jesus even mean to go down that road? Or was he trying to make a different point? But I do think it's interesting. I don't think, sometimes it's somewhat bothersome to me to see that. But I don't know that is necessarily an example of kind of ancient tendency to only view things through a male lens. There may be another explanation to that. But I think it's an intriguing question, and I think the answer is virtually always it is the case that it is. Now, God is sometimes portrayed as a woman, so that's an interesting point. In the book of Proverbs, for example, and other places, so they don't have any problem with that. And Jesus does that as well, when he talks about, I want to gather you as a hen gathers its chicks. Last I checked, a hen was a female animal, right? So there are plenty of, but the problem with this language, and I talked about this just before, is that the Bible, when it characterizes God or heavenly things, it often uses personification, or what we call in theology anthropomorphism, which is it uses a human characteristic to describe a non-human thing. So if I'm portraying an angel as a male figure, right, then that is, but he's not a human, right? Then that's important. But there other is, and we'll get into this when we get into the question about Genesis 6. Genesis 6 says, in the days of Noah, before the flood, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, entered into the daughters of men, and it produced the Nephilim, the giants that were in the land. Well, it seems to me pretty likely that these particular angels, if that's what they are, had the capacity to function in a male way. And so this is another question. Do they have the ability to do different things or be different things in different situations? So it's a huge, huge question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Yeah, and there's only 2 named angels in the Bible. on the good side, and it's Michael and Gabriel. They're the only two named angels of the Bible. So, quickly, one more question. Yes, sir.
And if I'm treading on next week, that's fine.
Okay, I'm just going to always default to that all the way through.
And you mentioned that they are portrayed as a military team.
Yeah, that's right.
So many places in the Old Testament it talks about God of the angel armies. And is that one of the
Okay, I'm glad you did say that, because the most common way to portray angels in the Old Testament is using the word host, which is a military term. The host, Elisha looked and he showed his servant, and he could see this massive army of people, and it was the hosts, and there were countless myriad of the hosts of heaven, and there's this vast army of the Lord. But it's not the only description. There's other kinds of descriptions. One of the big questions is, who is the angel of the Lord? Sometimes is even used interchangeably with God, and also at the burning bush. So there's some really interesting questions, that we don't have full answers to every one of them. And luckily for me, we're out of time, so I don't have to I don't have to try to answer them. So, but this is really good. This is really interesting. This is going to get us into the Bible, and I think it's going to get us thinking about some really good things. And so I'll see all of you guys next week. So you're dismissed.